50 master mechanics tried and 50 failed. Some left town, others left with broken jaws. This wasn't just a motorcycle. It was a $1.5 million cursed Leviathan belonging to the president of the Hells Angels, and it was about to cost a 22-year-old rookie his life, or make his legend. The air in Barstow, California was thick with dry heat, and the metallic tang of motor oil when the ground began to tremble. It wasn't an earthquake, it was the synchronized, thunderous roar of 30 heavy V-twin engines tearing down Route 66. At Granger's Customs, a highly respected but gritty motorcycle shop on the edge of town, the mechanics stopped what they were doing. Tools were set down on greasy rags. Conversations died in dry throats. Every man in the garage knew that sound. It was the Hells Angels, and they weren't here for an oil change. At the front of the pack rode Silas Ironclad Montgomery. Silas was a mountain of a man, the president of the most feared charter on the West Coast, wearing a leather cut scarred by decades of asphalt and violence. But Silas wasn't riding his usual machine. He was on a standard road glide. Behind him, towed inside a custom-built, reinforced, glass-sided trailer, was the reason for this menacing procession. They called it the Leviathan. To call it a motorcycle was a gross understatement. It was a $1.5 million mechanical masterpiece, a Frankenstein's monster of engineering that blended outlaw biker culture with classified aerospace technology. The frame was forged from a smuggled military-grade titanium alloy, making it impossibly light and virtually indestructible. The exhaust pipes were laced with platinum to handle extreme heat, and the custom paint job, a deep, abyssal black, was supposedly mixed with crushed diamonds, giving it a sinister, razor-sharp gleam under the desert sun. But the real money, and the real mystery, lay in the engine. It was a custom-bored, one-of-a-kind hybrid power plant built by a renegade engineer who had mysteriously disappeared 2 years prior. Silas kicked his kickstand down. The heavy thud echoed across the quiet gravel lot. He walked toward the shop, his boots crunching heavily, his eyes hidden behind dark aviators. Bill Granger, the 60-year-old owner of the shop, wiped his hands on a rag, his face pale beneath a thick layer of grease and soot. "Bill," Silas said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that offered no warmth. "Silas, what brings the charter to my door?" Bill asked, trying to keep his voice from shaking. Silas gestured to the glass trailer. 2 massive enforcers were already unlatching the ramp. "The Leviathan is sick, Bill, and I am rapidly losing my patience." The legend of the sick Leviathan was well known in the underground mechanic community. It was a curse that had already broken 50 of the best wrenches from Seattle to San Diego. The problem was as terrifying as it was baffling. The bike ran like a dream at low speeds, a symphony of perfect combustion. But the moment the speedometer hit exactly 85 miles per hour, the engine would violently seize. It wouldn't just stall. A catastrophic shudder would tear through the chassis, the electrical system would completely fry, and the bike would brick itself. For exactly 3 hours, it would remain entirely dead, impenetrable to any diagnostic scanner. Then, at the 3-hour and 1-minute mark, it would fire right back up as if nothing had ever happened. Big Ray Peterson, a master mechanic down in Los Angeles, had sworn it was a faulty wiring harness. He stripped the bike down to the frame 3 times. When it failed again, Silas gave him a choice: close his shop forever or lose his hands. Ray was now selling real estate in Idaho. Jimmy O'Connell, a genius with fuel injection mapping, insisted it was a software glitch. When the bike died at 85 miles per hour on the highway, nearly throwing Silas into oncoming traffic, Silas walked back to Jimmy's shop and shattered his right hand with a torque wrench. 50 men. 50 experts with decades of experience, state-of-the-art computers, and thousands of dollars in parts. All of them failed. "Silas, you know I respect the club," Bill stammered, his eyes darting to the imposing machine as it was rolled down the ramp. But 50 guys have looked at this. Guys with better tech than I have. If they couldn't find it, Silas stepped into Bill's personal space. The smell of stale tobacco, leather, and impending violence washed over the older mechanic. I didn't bring it to them, Bill. I brought it to you. You've got a reputation for old-school grit. The rally in Sturgis is in exactly 3 days. I am leading the pack on that bike. Silas reached out and tapped a massive ring-clad finger against Bill's chest. You have 72 hours. If you fix it, I'll pay you 50 grand in cash. If you can't fix it, Granger's Customs belongs to the Hells Angels. And if you try to pack up and run in the middle of the night, well, you belong to us too. Without waiting for an answer, Silas turned on his heel. The Angels mounted their bikes in terrifying unison and roared out of the lot, leaving behind a cloud of suffocating dust and a $1.5 million death sentence, sitting in the middle of Bill Granger's shop. The atmosphere inside the garage for the next 48 hours was a suffocating mix of panic, whiskey, and exhaust fumes. Bill Granger immediately pulled his 2 senior mechanics off every other job. Dave Collins, a 30-year veteran who could rebuild a carburetor blindfolded, and Hank Miller, an electrical savant who used to wire fighter jets, were thrown onto the Leviathan. In the background, sweeping up the metal shavings and emptying the oil pans, was Toby Henderson. Toby was 22, scrawny, and looked like a stiff breeze could knock him over. He had grown up dirt poor in a trailer park just outside of Bakersfield, surviving by scavenging broken lawn mowers, washing machines, and eventually motorcycles, fixing them up and selling them. He didn't have fancy certifications or a degree in mechanical engineering. What Toby had was a savant-like intuition. He didn't just understand machines, he felt them. He could listen to a sputtering engine and picture exactly which valve was sticking. But at Granger's Customs, he was just the rookie, the kid who fetched the coffee and scrubbed the grease traps. For 2 agonizing days, Toby watched the veterans fail. Dave and Hank started with the obvious. They hooked the bike up to a $20,000 diagnostic scanner. The screen read 0 errors. The Aerospace-Grade Engine Control Unit, ECU, reported that everything was operating at absolute perfection. It's a ghost, Hank muttered, wiping sweat from his forehead. The computer says the air-to-fuel ratio is flawless. The timing is dialed in to the microsecond. They replaced the spark plugs. They recalibrated the fuel injectors. They drained the synthetic fluids and replaced them with specialized racing blends. On the afternoon of the 2nd day, they strapped the Leviathan to the shop's dynamometer, a treadmill for motorcycles that allows mechanics to test bikes at high speeds while stationary. Bill, Dave, and Hank stood behind the safety glass. Dave throttled the bike up. The roar was deafening, a beautiful, terrifying mechanical scream. 60 miles per hour, 70 miles per hour, 80 miles per hour. Toby stood in the corner, a broom in his hand, his head tilted. He wasn't looking at the computer monitors. He was staring intently at the engine block. Through the ear-splitting noise, Toby's highly sensitive ears picked up something wrong. It wasn't a mechanical grind or an electrical pop. It was a high-frequency vibration, a parasitic harmonic resonance building up deep inside the crankcase. Completely out of rhythm with the cylinders. 84 miles per hour. Watch the voltage, Hank yelled. 85 miles per hour. Clack. A sound like a sledgehammer hitting an anvil echoed through the shop. The Leviathan violently shuddered, straining against heavy-duty tie-down straps. The headlight flickered and died. The computer monitors flatlined. The bike was a brick. Bill Granger buried his face in his hands. We're dead. We are legally dead men, Mr. Granger. Toby stepped forward quietly. Bill spun around, his eyes bloodshot and filled with terror. What do you want, Toby? Can't you see we're planning a funeral here? I heard something, Toby said, pointing a grease-stained finger at the lower half of the engine. Right before it seized, There's a parasitic vibration coming from the bottom end, behind the primary cover. It's not a software issue, sir. Something physical is throwing the timing chain out of alignment at high RPMs. Dave let out a bitter, exhausted laugh. The kid hears a vibration. Brilliant. Hey kid, 50 guys with actual degrees missed the problem, but I'm glad your magic ears figured it out. Go clean the bathroom. But Mr. Collins, if we just unbolt the primary cover and look inside the core. Silas specifically said the aerospace core is off limits. Bill barked, his voice cracking with panic. The original builder sealed it. Silas said if we crack the engine block and break the proprietary seal, he'll kill us on principle. We diagnose around it. We don't open the heart. By 2 a.m. on the third night, just hours before Silas was due to arrive, the fight had entirely left the veterans. Empty coffee cups and half-empty bottles of cheap bourbon littered the workbenches. Bill was passed out in his office chair, resigned to losing his livelihood and possibly his life. Dave and Hank were slumped against a toolbox, snoring heavily in exhausted defeat. The garage was eerily silent, save for the ticking of the cooling metal from the Leviathan. Toby stood in the center of the bay, staring at the $1.5 million beast. He knew the rule, do not touch the engine core. But Toby also knew something else. 50 men had failed because they trusted the computers, and they were too terrified of the Hell's Angels to dig deeper. They treated the bike like a bomb they were afraid to detonate. Toby treated it like a puzzle that was begging to be solved. Quietly, so as not to wake the sleeping men, Toby rolled a red tool cart over to the bike. He didn't grab a diagnostic scanner. He reached for a medical stethoscope, a trick an old-timer had taught him years ago. He placed the earpieces in, pressed the metal disc against the cold titanium engine block, and closed his eyes, tapping the frame gently with a rubber mallet. Ping, 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 the sound traveling through the metal was solid, until he tapped near the balancer shaft. Thud. It was hollow. A deadened acoustic response. Something was inside the sealed, untouchable aerospace engine block that didn't belong there. Taking a deep breath, Toby picked up a heavy-duty impact wrench and a set of Allen keys. His hands were shaking slightly. If Silas Montgomery found out a 22-year-old rookie had cracked the seal on his million-dollar baby, Toby wouldn't live to see 23. Screw it, Toby thought. We're dead anyway. With a sharp hiss of compressed air, Toby broke the first bolt. Then the second. He carefully removed the primary cover, exposing the pristine, highly complex gears of the aerospace-grade core. It was a marvel of engineering, sleek and perfectly oiled. But as Toby grabbed a flashlight and peered deep into the recess behind the balancer shaft, his breath caught in his throat. There, zipped tight securely to the main wiring loom and wired directly into the ignition coil, was a small, black, rectangular box. It wasn't an aerospace part. It wasn't a Harley part. It was a military-grade GPS tracker, wired in tandem with a kinetic kill switch. Toby stared at it, his heart pounding against his ribs. The bike wasn't broken. It wasn't cursed. The parasitic vibration Toby heard was the kill switch activating. Whenever the bike hit 85 miles per hour highway cruising speed, the device drew just enough power from the ignition coil to trigger a micro-seizure, deadening the system to mask the transmission of a heavy data burst. Someone was tracking Silas Montgomery. Someone with access to military tech, who knew exactly how to hide it inside a sealed engine block so no mechanic would ever find it. Toby reached out with a pair of wire cutters ready to snip the device out. Suddenly, the cold steel barrel of a .45 caliber pistol pressed hard against the back of Toby's skull. I explicitly said, a low, terrifying voice whispered in the dark, that the engine core was off limits, boy. Toby froze. He didn't need to turn around to know Silas Ironclad Montgomery was standing right behind him. The cold steel of the .45 caliber pistol dug into the base of Toby's skull, right where the spine met the brain. The click of the hammer being pulled back echoed through the silent garage like a cannon shot. "I explicitly said," Silas Ironclad Montgomery whispered, his voice a lethal, vibrating baritone in the dark, "that the engine core was off limits, boy. Turn around. Slowly. Let me see the face of the man who just signed his own death warrant." Toby swallowed hard. His mouth was completely dry, tasting of copper and fear. He slowly raised his hands, dropping the wire cutters onto the concrete floor with a sharp clatter. He turned around to face the giant. Silas wasn't wearing his leather cut. He was in a dark t-shirt, his massive arms covered in faded prison ink, his eyes completely dead of any warmth or mercy. He had slipped into the garage like a ghost, completely bypassing the motion sensors. "Mr. Montgomery," Toby said, his voice surprisingly steady despite the violent trembling in his knees. "I didn't break your engine. I found the bullet that was killing it." Silas narrowed his eyes, the gun unwavering from the center of Toby's forehead. "You cracked the seal on $1.5 million aerospace block, an engine built by a man who is currently lying in a shallow grave somewhere in the Mojave. Give me one good reason why I shouldn't put a hollow point through your skull right now." "Because 50 guys couldn't fix it and I just did," Toby replied, slowly pointing a grease-stained finger toward the exposed primary cavity. "Look behind the balancer shaft. Shine your flashlight." Silas didn't lower the weapon, but he reached into his pocket with his left hand, producing a tactical flashlight. He clicked it on, casting a harsh, blinding beam into the titanium belly of the Leviathan. The beam illuminated the sleek gears, the pristine oil, and the crude, black rectangular box zip-tied to the main wiring loom. For 5 agonizing seconds, nobody breathed. Silas slowly lowered the pistol. He stepped closer, his massive frame dwarfing the motorcycle. He leaned in, staring at the black box. The faint, pulsing red LED light on its side seemed to mock him. "What is that?" Silas demanded, his voice dropping an octave, simmering with a sudden dangerous rage. "It's a military-grade GPS tracker," Toby explained, his confidence returning as the conversation shifted to machines. "Coupled with a kinetic kill switch. It's spliced directly into the ignition coil and the main engine control unit." Silas reached out to rip it from the wires, but Toby lunged forward, grabbing the Hells Angel's wrist. It was a suicidal move, but instinct took over. "Don't," Toby hissed. "If you rip it out, the kill switch defaults to a closed circuit. It will permanently fry the ECU. The aerospace core will become a very expensive paperweight. It has to be surgically unwired." Silas stared at Toby's hand on his wrist, then looked the kid in the eyes. Slowly, Toby let go, stepping back. "Explain the 85 miles per hour, Silas commanded. "Why does it brick my bike on the highway?" "It's a flaw in the tracker's power draw," Toby said, wiping his greasy hands on his jeans. "This device doesn't have its own battery. It parasites off the bike's alternator. When you hit exactly 85 miles per hour, the engine RPM creates a specific harmonic frequency. It generates a voltage spike. The tracker is designed to handle standard Harley engines, not a highly classified aerospace power plant. The voltage overloads the tracker's regulator. To prevent catching fire, the device forcefully dumps all that electrical load straight back into your bike's ECU." "An EMP," Silas realized, his jaw tightening. "Exactly," Toby nodded. "A localized electromagnetic pulse. It throws the bike into a hard safety lockdown. The system forcefully shuts off to protect itself from the surge, bricking the bike for exactly 3 hours while the capacitors slowly discharge. Once they're drained, the computer resets, and the bike fires back up." Silas stepped back, running a heavy hand over his shaved head. The implications were massive, and they were entirely outside the realm of mechanical failure. "Arthur Pendleton," Silas muttered, staring at the black box. "The engineer who built this bike. He went missing 2 years ago before he could hand it over. My vice president, Dutch van der Wal. He tracked the bike down. He brought it to me. Said he found it in a storage locker in Nevada. Toby stayed quiet. He knew enough about motorcycle clubs to know when to shut up. He was watching internal club politics, and likely a murder conspiracy unfold in real time. Dutch, Silas said, a terrifying cold smile spreading across his face. Dutch wanted the president's patch. He knew I'd ride the Leviathan at the front of the pack at Sturgis. He planted this tracker. He was feeding my location to the feds, or worse, to the Iron Syndicate. The seizure at 85 miles per hour wasn't a curse. It was a glitch in his assassination plot. He was waiting for the bike to die on the highway so I'd be a sitting duck. Silas looked at the 22-year-old rookie. Kid, what's your name? Toby, sir. Toby Henderson. Well, Toby Henderson, you just saved my life. Silas holstered his pistol, the click echoing with finality. Now I need you to do the impossible. I can cut it out, Mr. Montgomery, Toby said, grabbing his wire snips. Give me 20 minutes, and this tracker goes in the trash and your engine runs pure. No, Silas commanded. Leave it in. Toby paused, looking at the biker as if you were insane. Leave it in? Sir, if I leave it in, they know exactly where you are. And the bike will still seize. Silas' eyes glinted with a predatory darkness. Dutch and his new friends are expecting me to be stranded on Interstate 90 on the way to Sturgis. They are tracking that signal, waiting for it to stop moving. I want them to follow it. I want them to walk right into a meat grinder. But I need my bike to run. Can you bypass the kill switch, leave the GPS transmitting, and stop the engine from seizing? Toby stared at the complex wiring loom. It was a spiderweb of high-gauge wire, fiber optics, and sensitive sensors. Bypassing a military-grade fail-safe without triggering the tamper switch was like performing open-heart surgery in the dark. I need an independent power source, Toby muttered, his mind racing. If I isolate the tracker from the ignition coil, it won't draw from the alternator. No voltage spike at 85 miles per hour. But I have to spoof the ECU thinking the circuit is still whole, or the bike won't start. Can you do it? Silas asked. I need a lithium-ion cell, a soldering iron, a 50-ohm resistor, and a whole lot of luck. You have 4 hours until dawn, Silas said, pulling up a metal stool and sitting down, crossing his massive arms. Get to work. For the next 4 hours, Toby Henderson put on a masterclass in electrical engineering. He worked with a surgical precision that defied his lack of formal training. Sweat dripped from his nose onto the concrete as he delicately spliced the tracker's power feed. He fabricated a dummy circuit, using the 50-ohm resistor, tricking the aerospace computer into reading a continuous loop. He then hid a small, rechargeable lithium-ion battery deep inside the front fairing, running a concealed, insulated wire down the frame to power the GPS device independently. By the time the first rays of desert sun began to peek through the dirty garage windows, Toby was twisting the final cap onto the primary cover. He grabbed his torque wrench, tightening the bolts to the exact manufacturer's specifications. In the office, Bill Granger awoke with a start. He checked his watch, 6:07 a.m. He rushed out of the office, expecting to find his mechanics dead and the shop burned to the ground. Instead, he stopped dead in his tracks. Dave and Hank were just waking up on the floor, rubbing their eyes. Standing in the center of the bay was Silas Montgomery. Next to him stood Toby, covered in grease, looking exhausted but fiercely awake. Roll it onto the dyno, Silas ordered. Bill, Dave, and Hank watched in stunned silence as Toby pushed the $1.5 million motorcycle onto the dynamometer treadmill. He strapped down the front and rear tires with heavy ratchet straps. Silas threw a leg over the massive black machine. He turned the ignition key. The Leviathan roared to life. It wasn't just loud. It was a physical force, shaking the dust from the rafters. The titanium exhaust spat blue flame. Silas clicked it into gear and rolled on the throttle. 50 miles per hour, 60 miles per hour, 70 miles per hour. Bill Granger was holding his breath, waiting for the inevitable explosion that would end his business. Hank and Dave backed away toward the exit. 80 miles per hour, 84 miles per hour. Toby stood right next to the machine, his eyes locked on the primary cover. 85 miles per hour. The needle swept past the cursed number effortlessly. 90 miles per hour. 100 miles per hour. 110 miles per hour. The engine didn't shudder. The headlight didn't flicker. The Leviathan sang a flawless, uninterrupted symphony of mechanical perfection. The tracker was transmitting, but the bike was completely free from its parasitic grip. Silas rolled off the throttle, letting the rear wheel slowly spin down. He hit the kill switch, and the sudden silence in the garage was deafening. Silas unmounted the bike, pulled off his aviators, and walked straight over to Toby. He reached inside his leather jacket and pulled out a thick, vacuum-sealed brick of $100 bills. $50,000. He tossed it onto Toby's chest. Toby scrambled to catch it, nearly dropping the heavy brick. "Mr. Granger," Silas said without looking at the older man. "Yes, Silas?" Bill stammered. "You're a fool," Silas rumbled. "You had a king sitting in your deck, and you were playing him like a pawn. From now on, Granger's Customs handles all the maintenance for the California charters of the Hells Angels. But on one condition." Silas pointed a massive finger at Toby. "The kid is the only one who touches my bikes. You make him head mechanic, or I burn this place to the ground." "Done," Bill choked out instantly. "He's head mechanic." Silas gave Toby a single firm nod. "I've got a rat to catch in Sturgis. Keep your wrenches clean, Toby. I'll be seeing you." The Angels arrived an hour later, an earth-shattering rumble that shook the Barstow dirt. Silas mounted the Leviathan, falling into formation at the head of the pack. As they rode out onto Route 66, Toby stood in the bay doors, the brick of cash heavy in his hands, watching the black aerospace motorcycle disappear into the heat shimmer of the desert. 3 days later, the news hit the underground wire. Dutch Vanderwall, the vice president of the Hells Angels alongside a crew of Iron Syndicate hitmen, had ambushed a GPS signal on Interstate 90. They expected a stalled motorcycle and a stranded president. Instead, they found Silas Montgomery backed by 50 heavily armed, furious Hells Angels waiting for them in the brush. Dutch didn't survive the encounter. The legend of the $1.5 million cursed motorcycle vanished overnight. In its place, a new legend was born. Not of a machine, but of a scrawny 22-year-old kid in Barstow who looked past the computers, ignored the fear, and listened to the heartbeat of a monster. Toby Henderson went from sweeping floors to leading the most notorious custom shop on the West Coast in a single night. The Leviathan taught the mechanic world a brutal lesson. Technology and expensive diagnostics can only see what they are programmed to see. Sometimes fixing the unfixable requires stripping away the ego, ignoring the noise, and simply listening to the machine.